The light doesn't turn on. I don't know why.
We're ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So, how did you become interested in white sapote, Bob?
Primarily because of the yield. I was looking at what people were growing in San Diego County, North County, and they grew macadamia nuts. You get about a tenth of a pound per square foot, if I remember right, and avocados was about a quarter of a pound per square foot. Sapotes looked like they were between 1 and 2 pounds per square foot, and I was interested in how much food value you could get per square foot.
Makes sense. How did you choose the plot you have in Duluth?
Well, I just liked to buy a piece of farmland when I moved to a new area, and so I looked for a piece of farmland at reasonable cost, and wound up in this part of the Fallbrook area.
And was the layout that you eventually developed something that you planned as you went along, or did it just happen?
Pretty much just happened.
So the groves appeared as you...
Well, actually, we started out with the fact that when I bought the piece of land, it had no grove on it. But there was a possibility of bringing in water, water from the city water. And the guy next to me was going to do that by planting avocados. So he asked if I wanted to join with him and do the same. So basically what I planted was originally an avocado grove. But frankly, I was less interested in the avocados than I was in planting some sapotes. So, and I also was not present. I was back east. The company had moved me around during that period. And essentially, so the avocados, I could hire somebody to do that, and then basically I just laid out 3 different, what I consider to be different sort of climate areas, and planted some sapotes there. And Paul Thompson was the one I was working with on this. He's the one that picked the sapotes for me. I didn't know anything about sapotes. And of course he and I, it turned out, being at some distance, had a little different way of looking at things. Since I had picked out 3 different areas where I had the same grafted sapote, same three copies of it, I would have put 1 in each area. But Paul was more interested in planting things so you could harvest them. So he would put all 4 or all 3 in one area and move on to another area and put a different group. So that's how the layout came about. It's a combination of misunderstandings.
Designed by default.
Right.
Yes. So there was no initial wish list on your part. Since you weren't familiar with sapotes, you deferred to Paul for varieties. So Paul went out and looked for varieties.
I think I talked to Paul, and in my conversations with him, it appeared to me that he knew every sapote plant in San Diego County, and maybe some more. So I left the choice up to him, and he had picked them from all corners of the county.
Now, obviously, when you went in to plant, you planted grafted trees.
Yeah.
Did you plant seeds in place, or did you sprout seeds and plant the seedlings and then?
No, there was a, over next to Paul Thompson's place in Vista, was a tree that was called the chestnut, for some reason, tree. And there were seedlings coming up on the ground under the chestnut tree. So the original plants, the first 3 little groves were that were planted with the avocados. among the other cows, were planted with things where he had grafted seedlings onto the chestnut tree. So they're all chestnut seedlings, chestnut tree seedlings, rootstocks.
Yes, and I've noticed that in the list. Do you want to describe what you think are your favorite varieties?
Oh yeah,
And why you like them?
my favorite variety was the rainbow, which I think is Paul's too, or was. Not the only one, but it unfortunately takes quite a few years to come into bearing. That's a real drawback. I mean, a number of years, maybe 10, or maybe not quite that many, but my second choice would be Golden Globe, which was a seedling I got, it was a grafted, the graft I got from Engelhard. And now Paul Thompson had another one called Silk that he was fond of. It's a tree over in Vista, no, it's in Fallbrook, I'm sorry. And the tree that, I find it a very annoying tree. Paul liked it because it had a skin that was apparently pretty tough, and the fruit could drop on the ground and would not spoil. Well, maybe not. There might be other reasons. I have a number of silks because S-E-L-C-K, because Paul was fond of it, and I find it the most annoying tree in the place. It's very unreliable. It can blossom and fruit any time of the year, at least 4 times a year, at least 4 different times a year, not every year. Usually one of the 4 every year, but you don't know which one. And it has also another characteristic that I dislike, which is that it ferments on the tree. So by the time you actually pick the silk sapote, it's likely to have, my guess would be around 4% alcohol in it. And it's not really what I want. Another problem is, if you pick it and eat it immediately, it's delicious. But if you put it in the refrigerator for a day, it's terrible. The taste goes way off. So okay, that's, again, so every so often I would decide that I'm going to rip out all the silk trees, and about then it would put on a performance and produce something good, and I would desist. So they're still there.
Could you talk about the differences between the green-skinned fruit and the yellow-skinned fruit?
Yeah, that's interesting. My impression is that the green-skinned fruit, generally speaking, were much bigger. There's bigger diameter, and were round fruit of maybe softball size, almost, and usually white in the inside, usually very sweet, also very little taste. They're okay, but it's not their strong point. The yellow ones, by and large, were smaller, and they were, I thought, had a lot more taste. Not quite as sweet. Now, the two have very clearly interbreed quite a bit. And when I got to looking at the pollens and so on, it turned out that the green ones in general were all female trees. They were not a mixture. The yellow ones were mixtures. So if you had the green sapotes, you needed a male tree around somewhere. Eve Konigsberg suggested to me one time that if you found a male tree, that you ought to be not immediately rejected because it doesn't bear fruit. That as a ornamental tree, a male green skin tree might be just what you'd want. Because the problem with sapotes as ornamental trees is they they drop fruit all over the place, and somebody has to clean it up, or the rats will come in and do it for you, and that's not desirable. And so we're still looking for a good male tree, but everybody, I think, if it doesn't bear fruit, tends to throw it away.
Only certain fruits have made it as ornamentals when they don't fruit, as a fruiting tree. So
Could be.
it's probably true.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know. I don't know that I haven't ever seen an example in the case of Sapote.
No. How would you describe the optimal climate conditions for the white sapote, and how does Duluth either meet these or not meet these?
Actually, I think Duluth meets them very well. Sapotes don't want too much water. The first Sapotes I had was back before I bought the farmland, so I was just getting ready to, and I planted them in my backyard in Arcadia, and I was watering them the way I would water a normal tree, I guess, and I managed to kill several of them. They don't take over watering, they don't take it very well, and you can't overwater them easily. So in my practice in the other grove, we used to have some rain in the winter, not a lot, but I suppose 10, 12 inches or so. And I thought that was enough. I would leave them without any additional watering until, maybe May or June. No watering in the spring at all. And that just seemed, about time you got real summer coming up, then yes, you get to begin to water them. Now, after the fire we had there, which came over from Camp Pendleton in '85, there were some trees that were just cut off for, we cut the watering. The watering was totally messed up in certain areas. There were a few trees, well, and the avocados had been pretty well damaged anyway, some of them in those areas. So we just cut the water off. We didn't, and the Sapote trees kept on living. They did not produce a very good crop, the ones that didn't get watered, but they didn't die either. And by the way, it's been pointed out to me that there are Sapote trees up in the Altadena area, here in the Los Angeles area, that are growing in vacant lots where nobody waters them. And again, they don't produce a good crop, but they do persist. So this is a pretty good climate for these trees. But they like it on the dry side. I've gone through groves in Florida and also Hawaii, and in my impression of both was that the trees do not look happy in those areas. I thought they really were, it was too humid for them. I think Sapote is, my understanding is that it grows at around 4,000 and above feet in Mexico, for example, and that this is a fairly dry, they grow in fairly dry areas. So I think the Los Angeles area and the northern San Diego area are probably pretty good ones for Sapotes, and you just want to make sure you don't water them before. I would almost say you ought to look and see some evidence that they want some water before you water them.
Okay, then going along with that, describe what you consider the ideal soil requirements for the Sapotes. The soils
soil.
that you think would be the best soil conditions.
I don't really know. I don't think they're terribly. I think they're not very persnickety about the whole matter. Now, one thing about sapotes that people ought to recognize is that the sapote tends to want to have a good deep taproot. And it goes down, bang, and some sapote trees are 50, 60 feet tall, and that taproot must be pretty impressive. But at the same time, they also have a lot of roots that run along the surface. They run out quite a ways, so maybe 100 feet. And these are kind of sort of orangey roots. They're not like the taproots. And the orangey roots will get them out to where they find what they want. And probably, I don't think they buckle sidewalks and things, but they do run around and get into things. You got fertilizer and water lives a little ways away, they'll find it.
And if you could just repeat what you told me earlier, what you think about confining the root system would do to the tree.
Well, I think if you can't run a taproot down very much, you block it, then it won't go very tall. But I did have some at the top of the hill, where the topsoil had pretty much all disappeared, so that it was tough enough for me to dig into the ground, had it all. So, but there's enough soil around, leaf mulch maybe, I don't know, that they could grow. But after 5 years, you had a tree that was maybe 3 feet tall. And as you went down the hill, same graft, pretty much same type of rootstock, which are seedlings. The topsoil increased as you went down the hill, and the height of the trees increased too. The bottom of the hill, which is probably 100 feet away, and about the fifth tree, that would be maybe a height of 15 feet, as opposed to 3 feet at the top of the hill. This group of trees all started producing fruit at about the same time. And of course, the amount of fruit was in proportion to the size of the tree.
I've heard it said before by someone else that they thought planting the seed directly in the ground, if you're going to go back and graft and want it to grow there, would be more advantageous than planting it in a pot. I think that was to get optimal size and optimal bearing out of that tree. So really, if you start out with your seedling in a pot, you're just going to get maybe a slightly smaller tree than if you planted the seed in the ground.
Well, if you put your seedling in the pot, you're really messing up its taproot, that's for sure. So you may get a shorter tree. But I've done it both ways, about half and half. And my impression is that in my grove, I don't want a tree more than 15 feet tall anyway, probably. It's just not handy to pick trees that are 60 feet tall. It just doesn't work. And so I find that putting them in a pot is probably easier. And that's putting them out in the field is okay when it comes time to graft it. Of course, it's not nearly as convenient. But I've done it both ways. It works fine.
So do you want to talk a little bit about grafting and the techniques that you used in the grove?
Well, I'm not a magic grafter at all. It was interesting. I used to have a bunch of pots that sit out in the open. Of course, I'm right next to Camp Hedlund in Duluth, and I can remember my neighbor pointing out that one day a helicopter hovered over my plantings and then flew away, and pretty soon a Humvee or one of those came running out and right up to the planting, and evidently from the air it must have looked to them like it was a pot. Well, they were discouraged about that and decided it wasn't. They went off and left it alone. But at any rate, on the grafting, I used to watch Paul Thompson graft. Now, Paul used a pocket knife of no particular vintage. You always sharpen it before you use it, but and his instructions on grafting were fine. If you did grafting all day, every day for a week or two, I imagine you might get pretty good at it. But I never did that, so I was never very good at it. So one day I went over and decided to seek advice from Judge Vincent down in Orange County. And Judge Vincent had made a display out of having grafted sapote trees each month of the year successfully. And so I got him to teach me, and Judge Vincent used a little plane that they make for model making in hobby shops. A little plane about 2 inches long to make a good, smooth, and that worked fine. I found it worked fine. My principal problem in grafting was that I tended to wait until the buds were pushing too much. Fundamentally, I would pick scions where the buds were pushing a little bit. I'd graft them, and boy, it would just come on out and grow, and then all of a sudden it would die immediately. Well, what was happening was, since the buds were pushing, the scion that was grafted would go ahead and put out leaves and look like it was going places, but the graft actually hadn't taken. And so at a certain point, it got cut off, and that was the end of that. So what I concluded was that, in my work at least, that getting a scion before the buds start pushing was pretty important. Now maybe at other points of the year, like Judge Vincent, you could do it some other way. I don't know what he did in some cases. Judge Vincent had his own, Judge Vincent actually grafted sapotes for Armstrong Nursery. And one time they gave him an order for, I think, 500 Subels. Well, Judge Vincent, being a judge, and like surgeons and school teachers and other people with strong opinions, apparently gave Armstrong Nursery 350 of something he called Fiesta, which he regarded as better than Subel. And the other 150 were Subel, and I guess he was the only one Armstrong could get them from, so that's what they sold for a while. Anyway, that was where I learned about grafting, and I'm sure most people are better grafters than I am.
So obviously Paul Thompson enjoyed running around the county finding different white sapote cultivars and coming back and grafting them in your grove.
Well, yes and no. Now, Paul was in the grafting business, so he didn't volunteer grafting.
Okay.
Let's put it this way, his ideas of how much to charge were quite reasonable. But he knew of so many sapotes, many of which he didn't like. For example, I have a sapote in Grove 2. It's called the Stickley. And the original name of that was Stickley 2-4. And it turns out that it was in a grove by somebody named Stickley, which I visited. And that particular one was the fourth tree in the second row. I think there were 4 rows and about 50 grafted trees. And I think the original tree that the seedlings and the grafts both came from, Stickley had, were I think a Vernon and a Subel. So there was not a whole lot of variation in those trees. But Paul actually went through and sampled apparently most of these trees in this grove before he concluded that 2-4 was the right one. I think 2-4 is a sort of medium quality. So now, So Paul knew a lot of Sapote trees that I don't think he would bother to graft. The rainbow tree, for example, is located in Rainbow, which is up near I-15, near the Riverside County border. And that particular location had about 3 or 4 Sapote trees. The rainbow tree itself was a very tall tree, and I don't know why he picked that, but the taste I thought was really the best. So he did have a lot of other ideas, and over the years I would talk to him. I think this went downhill for a while. In other words, Paul got over, and I don't think he was doing the same amount of prospecting around that he used to.
Yeah. Did some of the cultivars come from UCLA and Art Schroeder?
Yeah, they did. I went over to UCLA one time, and Art took me out to a grove that was over on the west side of the campus, and I think there were about 20 trees in the grove. So I took signs from some of these, and Schroeder basically pointed out that that was the time to do it because they were going to build a dormitory or something there, which I think they did. And he gave me the history. I then took these back and grafted them, and I think I had 7 of them. I think 6 of the grafts took, something like that. And then I took scions over to Engelhardt, and he grafted them. Engelhardt's grafting was different. Engelhardt grafted things that were much thinner. He would graft, I think, things that were maybe like 3 or 4 millimeters diameter twigs. Both he and I flunked out on the same graft, though. I think it was the Coleman, but it didn't work for either of us. Maybe there's something wrong with the sign when I picked it. Who knows?
Hard to say.
And I've had other grafts from other people. I went through Engelhardt's. Engelhardt's another source of grass. He had one called the Bravo. The Golden Globe was from Engelhardt. The what was the other one? Yellow. No, not the yellow. Yeah, maybe the yellow was. Anyway, Engelhardt, I think it's in the literature, has got his from somebody that brought in, who was down in San Diego, and had brought his up from Mexico. And when he was getting ready to pass on, Paul got them and brought them up to his place on I-15, Engelhardt, that is. And it was interesting to deal with Mr. Engelhardt, who was a wonderful old character, who lived with a woman who was worried about the fact that he was giving things away rather than selling them. And she was pretty tough on him. Anyway, he did have some others. Another one was, I think the Gwen came from him. And then they had a number 8, was it? Well, I have to look that up, but it's in Grove 1. So I probably got more from Engelhardt than I did from, well, Paul more from Engelhardt than from Schroeder.
You need to talk a little bit about pruning of the trees.
Oh, okay. I never did figure out the right way to prune trees. Now, obviously, you can't let a tree get to be a jungle gym. You can't get too much going on. But I did have 2 yellow trees that looked just about. Now, yellow is not a good variety. It's much too early. Mine grove would fruit around August, and the fruit was awful. Well, not awful, but it was early fruits are not very good in general. And but these two trees were remarkably similar, and they were growing side by side. And I thought, well, you know, with most fruit trees, you prune them back, and then you have a flush of growth, and it's a way of invigorating a tree. In many cases, increasing the productivity. So I did a productivity prune on one of these trees, one of the two yellows. And the yellows, I think, in Grove 5. And essentially, I pruned it back so it was open and so on. And then I waited to see what would happen. And frankly, I got very little crop and practically no flush of growth. But it gradually grew back. It took it about 10 years to grow back to where it was about similar to the other unpruned tree. I don't think it was any better. And of course I missed much of the productivity over the 10-year period for whatever good that would do. But, so I think another thing that's interesting is a tree that I call the Tremont tree. It's near Tremont and Surfrider. It's about 3 houses down from Surfrider in Oceanside on Tremont Street. And there's a tree that it looks like it had grown. It looks like it probably was probably a 50-foot tree or something. A pretty good-sized tree. Somebody cut it off at about 15, possibly 20 feet. And the top of the trunk is cut off, is my recollection, maybe 8 inches or something like that. Pretty good. The interesting thing to me is that tree has not grown up anymore. I've been watching it for almost 30 years and it stays the same. So I just don't think that Sapote trees, pruning is, I don't know how to do it. They don't behave like apples and peaches and things like that.
Is there any type of fertilizing that seems to give any better results on these trees than anything else?
Let's put it this way. I don't know about that. Most of the time, I just use fertilizers that are the standard NPK, sort of chemical fertilizers, and I think the trees are perfectly happy with that. However, I decided to turn my grove into an organic grove at one point. That was the early days of organic, but they had an outfit that certified you as organic. You had to meet various criteria, but one of them was that, of course, you didn't use chemical fertilizers. Well, we don't have much. Organic doesn't apply very well to the field. I keep asking the organic people, you know, I use drip irrigation for a lot of things, and what is it you put in the drip water to fertilize? And without, except for some fish material, which I don't think you want to use more than once a year because it's got an awful lot of chlorine in it, I don't think there is a good fertilizer. So anyway, but the Sapotes, as I said, seem to be pretty well acclimated. So for several years I didn't fertilize these trees. And I found there was a very clear and definite diminishment of productivity. So after about 3 or 4 years, I gave up on it. During that period, I was a great annoyance to my stepson, who had a grove of guavas next door. And because I was organic, I was the home for all kinds of critters, as ground squirrels. And ground squirrels loved it in my place because nobody did anything to them. They were free to roam. But he was across the road from me, and they would come over on his side. And so he had a program for catching them. I mean, well, killing them, really. poisoning them, whatever. But my neighbor complained then, in effect, that my being organic was damaging his property, which it probably was.
So aside from ground squirrels, are there any other pests and other problems like diseases that white sapotes have?
Well, we had several kinds. There's a vernon tree, old original vernon tree over on Vista Way. I used to get science from that. The last time I was there, though, and nobody was taking care of it at that point, but it was continuing on. And the last time I was there, it had a very bad case of scab. So I did an extra special job of cleaning everything before I went up. I gave up on going back to there. Okay, another one is snails. The snails are a definite problem with sapotes. I don't think they're particularly hard to eradicate again. Of course, if you're organic, that's another problem. But we did have some, as I remember, what we did was you bring in some snails that eat others. You have little snails that eat the bigger snails. And I brought those in. But it turns out that they don't move very well. You put them in this tree and this tree, okay, they take care of those trees, but they don't move out and take care of all the rest of them, like they're supposed to, I guess. Anyway, they didn't migrate. So we had to put more of them out. But eventually, whatever it was that was causing these problems seemed to go away. I don't know what the problem, I don't know what I was doing, but those are the principal, well, there are some other problems. There are gophers in my area. I don't think the gophers were particularly bad on the sapotes. We had some seedless papaya, mountain papayas in there, and wow, the gophers took them immediately. And of course they like figs pretty well too. But sapotes seem to be pretty resistant. Anyway.
Obviously, the white sapote fruit is fragile, and you have some ideas on what to do with the fruit besides using it as a fresh fruit.
Sure. Well, I think it, in the whole period that I was working with sapotes, even today, it's been a principal problem. You have a fruit that is apparently quite well liked by a lot of people. Peter Nichols of the Brown Ranch up in Carpinteria area said he ran a test on cherimoyas and sapotes. Again, getting them tasted by people who had never tasted it before. And his results were that about 75% of the people who tasted cherimoyas liked them. In this case of sapotes, it was about 95%. Now, sapotes are very sweet, and so what do you do with them? Well, and they do ferment. So I've tried making, letting them get overripe, and then crushing them, mashing them up, and you get a two-layer system out of it. And one of the layers ferments beautifully, and the other layer does not. I'm not sure what that is. I didn't take the trouble to try to dig into it. There is some literature which would indicate that sapotes have sugars in them that are not six-membered rings. And of course, something that's not a six-membered ring does not lend itself to making as high a yield of ethanol as one would like. But at any rate, the ethanol I did get, of course it was just barely fermented, tasted like a sort of a terrible Chardonnay. But of course it hadn't been aged at all. So I think it's a one application that deserves some more work. Sapotes will ferment faster than grapes. I was doing some work one night and didn't get finished and stuck in the refrigerator, but that doesn't slow it down at all. Next morning it was fully fermented. Now, my conclusion, however, was not any of these. First of all, I think there are going to be some Sapotes that come along, and I have one that's called the Roa, which at the moment is a candidate on the basis that when I have a Sapote, I tend to pick the fruits, and Sapote that doesn't ripen all at once, and most of them don't. They ripen maybe over a period of several weeks. And I pick the fruits, some of which are ripe and some are less ripe and some are even less ripe, and put them on the windowsill, and as they get ripe, I then sample them. In the Roa's case, it's the only case that I know of where I had some that I picked actually green, that turned yellow on the windowsill over about a month period, and were good to eat at that point. Most of the time, if they're green, and they're not a green type Sapote, if they're a yellow Sapote that's still green, that isn't going to work. But one of the big problems with Sapotes is you can't ship them, because by the time they get ripe, they just can't be shipped very far. They're soft, and they just don't hold up for shipping. And they don't hold up for the amount of time it takes between the picking and the sale. And maybe not, it may, like a Sep, not hold up in the refrigerator either. Okay, so nevertheless, I think there will be some varieties found somewhere that will solve these problems, and you'll get a fruit that's typical Sapote and is really quite sweet. Sapotes are sweeter than grapes, I think. Sapotes are, my measurements, such as they were that Sapotes have maybe around 25 to 30% certain, or the equivalent, which I think is pretty high. Okay, some people don't like that sweet fruit, but then some people do. Anyway, the other usage though would be to mash them up and make a puree. And I've done that, and I've kept the puree in the freezer for 5 years and had it, as far as I could tell, not to deteriorate. Now, what would you do with them as a puree? Well, one of the things you can do is make a drink. It's sort of a shake. And they can substitute for it makes a very good shake. We really need somebody to do some cooking with them. And I'm not much of a cook, unfortunately, and haven't done much. I have a feeling that somebody could be talked into this, that with a supply. At one of the colleges, Northridge specifically has a unit that does this kind of work. I've talked to the puree people. There's a company up in the wine country that sells purees up near the school for cooking up there. And they tell me that they have pureeing devices that will go through a grove, puree the ripe fruits, freeze them, all in one vehicle. So in due time, when we get there, But on the other hand, they say they don't bother to puree things unless there's a market. And what's the market? Well, you have to be able to sell it to some chefs. So you go to the chefs and you say, how about using these things? Well, give us a recipe. Well, so we're now back to the problem of the cooks developing recipes. And that's what we don't have. I think pureeing and recipes is the thing to do. If you do it that way, then maybe the best yields, I think, are the green skinned sapotes. And of course, they don't have much taste. But if you're going to use it in cooking, you maybe don't care. I have some other fruits that I mix in, and they act. In effect, I think in many ways you can say the sapote is like a wine grape. It's a fairly cheap way of getting sugar. Now, that may not sound like much, but going back to the productivity, the highest productivity, in my impression, what I've seen when I looked at it, was sugar cane. As you get the most amount of edible sugar per acre by growing sugar cane. My impression is that with some of the high yield sapotes, that you can beat that per acre. You can beat sugar cane per acre for production of sugar. That's high yield. There is a big difference in yields. Some sapotes have high yields, some don't. Anyway.
And don't the green-skinned fruit tend to ripen all at once? So it makes it easier for post-harvest?
That's probably so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whereas the yellow-skinned ones tend to stretch
Yeah,
out?
that's right. Yellow-skinned ones, I think, are the ones that are more, that should be looked at as fresh fruit. But getting a puree, I think, is something that the white skin ones are fine. Let's see. Cuccio is the variety that I would recommend for this productivity at this point. And yellow productivity, reliability. It's not my favorite to eating, but you can make one reliably a lot of sugar that way. Anyway.
And one of the questions I forgot to ask back a ways, since you used a lot of the chestnut seedlings for your trees, that was by design because they were available for Paul, he grafted them and used them. Are there varieties that you would recommend as seed sources over others, or would you just say, take your chances and plant whatever seed you get?
Well, actually, the Cuccio, again, I just mentioned, Cuccio and chestnut are somewhat similar. I think the chestnut, if you eat it out of hand, chestnut's a little better. But they're both pretty similar. The Cuccio, however, will produce more seedlings in my experience, than the chestnut. So I have tended to lean toward using seedlings from Cuccio. However, I think seedlings from just about anything will work. And a great many of mine have seedlings of various sundry yellow varieties. Again, the yellow ones tend to be a little bigger, and you may have to control the size for commercial purposes.
Well, that's about all the questions I had, unless there's other things you want to talk about that I haven't covered.
Well, let me put it this way. I have really enjoyed the Sapotes. I think it's a tree with a lot more character than any other tree I know of. I mean, having a grove of Sapotes I'm continually being surprised at what they'll come up with. One of the trees got some kind of bug in the trunk, and fundamentally, the best I could do was it was a pretty good sized trunk now, about over a foot, and this took place. It covered maybe a quarter of it. So I cleaned it all out, cut it back to where it was not damaged, and then I watched it. And you know, it only took it a year or two for the whole thing to heal. Where there was no bark at all, the bark had grown back, and so on, which was, I found quite interesting. Another thing that Sapotes have a tendency to want to produce 5 of everything. It's not universal, but that's the tendency. And one of the things they do sometimes is they come up and they go to branch, and they'll produce 5 branches, all at one point. Well, I can remember going through my grove one day and I saw these branches on the ground. And my first concern was maybe somebody's gotten in the grove and going around banging things. But then I got to looking more, and what was happening was these places where you had 5 branches all coming off at the same point in the parent branch had grown, and you can't support 5 branches at one point. So in effect, the tree would prune itself, and it would gradually, 4 of the branches would crowd out the 5th one, which then would be lying on the ground where I could see it. As I say, the silk is particularly personable, not always desirably so, by any means. And it's the only one that I have that tends to ferment as much as I've said. The Sapotes do close down when there's no water or fertilizer. They shrink back, but they don't die. And they grow taller in some cases. There's some Sapote trees in Altadena that, I don't know, 30 feet or more tall, but practically no side branches. Now you don't want that either. And Sapotes will do that to you if you watch out. You've got a branch coming up that, with no side branches at all. And so it's a game. It's an interesting game to work with. I think the Sapote, the other thing about Sapotes, though, that you have to watch out for is if they're going to produce fruits, it's soft, it's very edible. The bees love it. We used to have bees coming over, and they would actually, bees would eat the fruit of it. And so pretty soon all you've got left is seeds on the ground. It's been a delightful fruit to work with, and I think I would recommend it highly. Thank you.
Great. Great. Well, once you've got questions, Fanny, that's all I have.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, I think the process worked well. By having me ask the questions that would, you know,
Yeah, it was fine.
re-cue you to things.
Well,
that
I think it's much better for the listener or watcher. So what is this going to look like? Can you see it?
Yeah, it's just like that. Oh, let me stop this.